Yevamos Daf Lamed Vez begins with a Mishnah that discusses the case of a woman who was usher at the time she fell to Yibum to do Yibum, and later that Isser went away. Does she become mutter, or now does she stay usher? The Gemara will have a brief comment which we've already seen in exchange that we've already had in the Gemara. Then the Gemara will go into the sugya of Isser Mosef and Isser Kolel. When you have two Isurim that apply to the same action, same relationship, one occurs after the other, do they both exist or does only one exist? The Gemara will divide between two different types of additional Isurim and two different opinions, and we'll analyze each of them. So first of all, let's begin the Mishnah. We have a case where we have two brothers, Reuven and Shimon, married to two women who are sisters. Reuven dies without children. His wife falls to Yibum, to Shimon, and his wife is Shimon's wife's sister, therefore she's usher to do Yibum. If Shimon's wife later dies, now the Isser Achos Isha, the Isser of the Yavama being his wife's sister, goes away. However, the Mishnah rules she stays usher because at the time she fell to Yibum she couldn't do Yibum, therefore she was an Isser Eishes Ach, his brother's wife, and that remains even though the Isser Achos Isha has gone away. So Gemara asks that this is obvious based on a Mishnah we've seen earlier. We've seen the same case where the same thing happened, except that there was a third brother there at the time. And that third brother did Yibum to Reuven's wife. Later he died, and that woman fell back to Yibum to Shimon. And we said over there the same thing happened. So the Gemara says in that case, if you say that even though she wasn't totally free to the shuk at that time, she still is usher. And when she falls to Yibum again to Shimon, she's still usher, even though Shimon's wife is now gone and the Isser Achos Isha is not there. She's still usher. We do not say that now she becomes mutter. And there she wasn't free to go to the shuk because she still had Hazikah to Levi. So in our case, where she's totally free to go to the shuk at the time she fell, there's absolutely no chiddush to say that she would now have a new Isser to go to the shuk, and she would now have a new Zika connection to Shimon after Shimon's wife has died. So this case is obvious based on the case of three brothers which we've seen earlier. So the Gemara says you're right, this case is obvious once we've seen that, but the progression that happens is as follows. The Tana originally wanted to say that this was the only case in which the woman remains usher. He wanted to say in the other case where there was a brother of Levi and Reuven's wife, when she fell to Yibum, although she was usher to Shimon, she was still had a zikah to Levi, that in that case she would be mutter to do Yibum, she would be usher to go to the shuk. He intended to rule differently than it says here, and then it says in that Mishnah. Therefore, he said this Mishnah first, and this Mishnah was the only one that was supposed to be usher. In this case, where there's only two brothers. Then he later retracted, and he said chiddush that case is usher as well, even though she had a zika to Levi. She still maintains the Isser. She still can't do Yibum. Therefore, that case is usher as well. Once he was mechadish that that case was usher as well, he put that Mishnah first because it was chaviva, it was beloved to him, because he said a chiddush that it is usher. That concludes the Gemara's discussion on this Mishnah. Now the Gemara goes to the regular case of any time a woman has two Isurim on her. Here we'll be discussing the Isser Eishes Ach and the Isser Achos Isha. Do one of them apply or do both of them apply? So the case would be where Reuven and Shimon are married to two sisters. So Reuven's wife, as far as she relates to Shimon, is both Shimon's brother's wife, that's the Isser Eishes Ach, and Shimon's wife's sister, that's the Isser Achos Isha. Both of them apply. So if Shimon were to be together with this woman, would he get one Isser? Or would he get both Isurim? And if he got one, which one would it be? So we have a brayso that says this in Machlokas between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yossi says that she gets and he gets both Isurim, both apply at the same time. Rabbi Shimon says she only gets one Isser, and that's the Isser Eishes Ach. The Gemara says, what do we have a brayso that says that she only has the Isser Achos Isha? Contradiction. So the Gemara says the difference is which one came first. Whichever one came first is the one that she has. Whichever one came second does not apply because it cannot apply on top of a pre-existing Isser. So if Reuven married his wife first, that means that the woman was an Eishes Ach to Shimon before anything else happened. Later, Shimon married her sister. She became an Achos Isha. That doesn't apply, and the only Isser she would have would be Eishes Ach. If it was vice versa, Shimon got married first, so Shimon first married his wife. This woman was his wife's sister. Then she would have the Isser Achos Isha, and the Isser Eishes Ach, when Reuven marries her, would not apply because it cannot apply on top of another one. So the Gemara now has a kasha, though. In the case where Reuven marries first, so she has an Isser Eishes Ach, and the Isser Achos Isha doesn't apply to her, so that when Reuven dies and the Isser Eishes Ach goes away, she should be able to do Yibum because the Isser Achos Isha never applied to her. She never was an Achos Isha. So Gemara says that the Isser Achos Isha is hanging, it's suspended, and it's waiting to fall. As soon as the Isser Eishes Ach ends, because Reuven has died and she falls to Yibum, the Isser Achos Isha is poised to take effect. Since it's poised to take effect, the Isser Eishes Ach never bothers going away because there will not ever be a heter. The Isser Eishes Ach is only there if there's a heter Yibum. Since the heter Yibum can't happen, the Isser Eishes Ach stays, and this woman remains in Isser Eishes Ach. Okay, now the Gemara has a question on Rabbi Yossi, and this is going to be a lengthy discussion. The Gemara wants to know, is it really true that Rabbi Yossi holds that you can have two Isurim at once? That would seem to mean that he holds of a concept called Isur Chalal Isur. You could have two Isurim applying at the same time, one overlapping the other, and you can have two Isurim at once. The problem is that we see that Rabbi Yossi does not hold that way. Rabbi Yossi says you can only have one Isur at a time. We see that in a different case. That's the case of somebody who's together with a woman who has two Isurim. The example there that's brought is his mother-in-law, who's also a married woman. Now, his mother-in-law is an Isur Chamoso, married woman is an Isur Eishes Ish. Now, the nafkamina, the halachic difference that is incurred by this question of does she have one Isur or two Isurim there is which Misa will he get. He gets Misa for being with her anyway. Both the Isur Chamoso and the Isur Eishes Ish incur Misa. However, there's two different Misas. One is Sreifa, one is Chenek. Sreifa is considered to be more Chamer. So if both Isurim apply, then he would get the more Chamer, the stricter Isur, because both of them apply, so we go with the stricter one. If, however, only one Isur applies, then he would get that Isur. So if the only Isur that applies is Chamosa, which is Sreifa, that would be the stricter Isur, he would get that anyway, it would be no difference. If, however, the only Isur that applies would be the Isur Eishes Ish, and the Isur Chamosa is blocked, then he would only get the Isur Chenek, and that would be a different Psak. So there we see, in the case of somebody who's together with his mother-in-law who's an Eishes Ish, we have a machlokes tanaim, which Isser he would, which Misa he would be responsible for, which Misa would be the one that he gets. The Tanakama says he gets the stricter one. That means that the Tanakama holds both Isurim apply, and whichever one is stricter is the one he gets. So Rabbi Yossi says he gets whichever one was the first Isser. So if the time that he married his wife, and this woman became his mother-in-law, she was an almana, she was a widow, and therefore the Isser Chamoso comes before the Isser Eishes Ish. Later she gets married. The time that he's together with her, the second Isser has tried to fall, which is the Isser Eishes Ish, tried to be chal on her, but it couldn't, and therefore the Isser Chamoso is there first. He would get Sreifa anyway. However, if she was an Eishes Ish first, and she was ushered him as an Eishes Ish, and later he married the woman's daughter, and she became Chamoso, so Eishes Ish applies first, and Chamoso cannot fall on top of it, and he would only get Chenek, which is the Isser for Eishes Ish. So we see here then that Rabbi Yossi holds the Isser Eino Chalal Isser. The second Isser does not apply when the first one's already there. How is it then in the case of Eishes Ach and Achos Isha that he holds both of them apply? So the Gemara says very simple, and that's because there's a concept called Isser Mosif. Isser Mosif means that the Isser, which is the second Isser, which is applying, is chal with relation to other people. That means that this woman who is Usser, this woman who was an Eishes Ach, she, let's say if she was an Achos Isha first, so the Isser Achos Isha is an Isser between her and Shimon. However, she's mutter to all the other brothers. She's mutter to Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zevulun. When Reuven goes and marries her, she's going to become an Isser Eishes Ach to Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zevulun. Since she's becoming an Eishes Ach to them, she becomes an Eishes Ach to Shimon as well, and now she has two Isurim. Gemara says that's great if the Isser Achos Isha came first, that the Isser Eishes Ach can apply on top of it because it applies to Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda as well. However, what if the Isser Eishes Ach came first? Isser Eishes Ach came first, you want Achos Isha to apply as well. Achos Isha is not applying to anybody else. There's nobody else who becomes an Achos Isha. Someone says, maybe you'll tell me no one else becomes an Achos Isha. However, the Isser Achos Isha does apply here. It applies to the man, because now he's going to be Asr on the other sisters of his wife. Not only is Reuven's wife Asr as an Achos Isha, but all the other sisters they had, Rachel, Leah. So therefore it's going to apply to them as well. It should apply in this relationship as well. Also, the Gemara says, no, that's not an Isser Kolel. That's not that the Isser that she had, that she's getting an Isser, she's going to be Isser to other people, and therefore, since she gets the same Isser Eishes Ach to other people, she also becomes an Eishes Ach to him. That's not what's happening here. What's happening is that he gets an Isser to somebody else, to the other sisters, therefore she should also get that Isser. That doesn't work, because it's not that she's getting the name of this Isser anyway, and therefore she should get it with this relationship also. It's other people are getting it, so she should get it too. Doesn't work that way. That's called an Isser Kolel. We don't hold of Isser Kolel. So therefore, what are we going to do in this scenario over here where the Isser Eishes Ach came first? Why would the Isser Achos Isha fall on it? The Gemara over here says, I'm going to change Pshat. When we said that Rav Yossi holds that you get both Isurim, it's not that you get both Isurim. You don't really get both Isurim. If you got both Isurim, that means that he would have to bring two Karbonos Chatas if he did it B'shogeg, one for each of the Isurim. That's not true. He doesn't get both Isurim. He only gets one. All we meant to say was that there's a certain aspect in which is viewed as if he got both Isurim, and that's the aspect of when we bury him, will we bury him in a grave of somebody who has did one Isur Kares, or would we bury him in a grave of someone who has done two Isurei Kares? someone who's done 2 Isur Ikaris is considered a Rasha and is buried amongst other Risham of equal caliber. And there, as far as that's concerned, we consider it as if he did 2 Isur. But actually, he only did 1. We are Mala Olav. We consider it as if he did 2, but he really only did 1. He only has to bring 1 Karban Chatas. And the Gemara says we have a similar discussion in a different sugya as to whether you have 1 Isur or 2 Isurim. This is going to be a lengthy discussion which will only start on this daf, and it's 3 cases where you have 2 Isurim that apply. 3 machloks in between Rabbi Chia and Bar Kapar with the same exchange in each of them. So let's go through the 3 of them. The first exchange is about a Zar, somebody who's not a Kohen, who did the Avoda, that's an Isser Kares, and he did it on Shabbos, so he's Mechal Shabbos, that's an Isser Kares as well. Now a Kohen is allowed to do Avoda on Shabbos. The question is, when we have a heter for a Kohen to do Avoda on Shabbos, does that apply only to a Kohen? But a Zar does an Avoda on Shabbos is both doing the Isser Zar and the Isser, and he's being Mechal Shabbos, or do we say no, the Isser to do avoda on Shabbos is taken off even for a zar? So the Gemara says the machlokes between Bar Kapara and Rabbi Chia. Bar Kapara says he only gets 1 iser. Rabbi Chia said he gets 2 isurim. The Gemara says each of them jumped up and said, I heard this exactly from Rabbi. Bar Kapara said, I heard Rabbi say he only gets 1. Rabbi Chia says he only gets 2. And they each argued their position logically. Rabbi Chia said that it's got to be that there are 2 isurim because the iser of the heter to be Mechal Shabbos to do Avoda only applies to Kohanim and doesn't apply to anyone else, and therefore this person has 2 Isurim. Rakapar says no, the heter applies to anyone doing the Avoda in the Beis HaMikdash. There's no Isser Chal Shabbos on Avoda in the Beis HaMikdash, and therefore he only gets 1 Isser. Same exchange, the Gemara happens, it says if you have a Kohen who does the Avoda, but he's a Balmum and it's Betumah. Now, Tumah is mutter to do because we say Tumah Hutra B'tzibor. If he's doing a congregational offering, it's the Tumah gets taken off and it's permitted. However, that's the same question applies. Does that only apply to somebody who is allowed to do the Avodah, such as somebody who is a Tam, somebody who's not a Balmum? So again, Rabbi Chia says he gets both Isurim because the heter Tumah Hutra B'tzibor only applies to a Tam, to a Kohen who doesn't have a Mum, and Rabbi Chia and Bar Kapar says no, it's taken off. There is no Tumah B'tzibor, and therefore he only has the Isser Bal Mum. Now the third discussion is if a Zar eats a Karban Of, which is Malika. Malika is nevela, it's not a proper shchita. Kohanim are allowed to eat it because it's part of their special avoda. So this zar, he's first of all eating karbanos that he's not allowed to eat, and second of all he's eating nevela that he's not allowed to eat. So again, Bar Kapara says he only gets 1 isser because the isser nevela comes off when we're talking about karbanos, and Rabbi Chia says he gets 2. They both jumped up and said, I heard from Rabbi specifically this way, and therefore we have the same discussion. There was the isser nevela taken off only for kohanim, or was the isser taken off even for a zar? So I think Mara wants to say, what is their machlokis? And machlokis must be over the Isser Kolel. And they both are arguing what does Rabbi Yossi hold. Does Rabbi Yossi hold of the Isser Kolel or not? Rabbi Chia says that there is, that he holds of Isser Kolel and therefore you get 2 Isurim. Bar Kapar says you don't hold of Isser Kolel and therefore you only get 1 Isser. So this Isser applies to others and therefore you would only get 1.